The purpose of this conversation and future conversations on this channel is education, understanding, and growth. I have no intention of hostility and wish for all parties involved or discussed to live happy, fruitful lives. To outline my background, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I support the teachings of David D. Friedman, Russell Brand, and Michael Malice. My guest today is Chris Dillingham. Would you like to say a brief outline of your political beliefs and current activities?
Sure. I basically believe in the non-aggression principle, the idea that it's wrong to initiate force to achieve the goals you're after. And that brings me into the libertarian camp. I kind of lean an anarcho-capitalist, and I'm involved with the Warren County Party as the treasurer, Warren County, Kentucky, that's where Bowling Green is. And also at the state level, I'm the membership director here in Kentucky. So I've been involved with the party for quite a few years now. So, yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
So first big question, as somebody who's involved in the Libertarian Party,
Here we go.
Is the two-party system broken?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, it works very well for the people involved in it. It keeps other people out of power. It keeps them from being challenged, presents citizens the illusion of choice when there actually isn't really any great choice. I mean, they'll debate things like, should we raise taxes a little bit or maybe keep them where they're at? I want to get rid of them completely. It's not a choice to me between those two things. I want to, anyway. So yeah, it works for them, but for the citizens, it does not work at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they do a really good job of making it feel like it's one versus the other, good versus evil, whichever side of that you're on.
Yeah, it's left Twix versus right Twix. I'd really rather just have a good steak dinner. So.
But Twix is temporarily satisfying, but bad for you in the long run.
Yes. Before, if I've ever heard one, right?
Ron Paul,
yes.
Considered a libertarian icon. From 1996 to 2015, he was ticketed as a Republican. Do you think that becoming part of the two-party system is necessary to actually exact any real change?
Necessary, no. I think a lot of people have made solid arguments that it's easier to get elected through the D's and R's, and that makes some sense too. But I mean, all in all, I don't care what party people run under if they're after making liberty happen for the citizens. We've got a lot of good Republicans out there that are focused on liberty. Kentucky, of course, often claims Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, who are certainly not perfect, but they're making big headway through the Republican Party, and they certainly have a lot of resources. But I think we need all types, and if our resources run limited, we might as well run them everywhere and make all the change we can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I know that even though he ran as a Republican for a period of time, his Ron Paul specifically, his voting record was pretty dang consistent throughout his entire career.
Yeah. And he of course was the Libertarian nominee for president for a couple times back before I got involved. Yeah, unfortunately, national races, it's very difficult for libertarians to make a lot of headway in just because of the nature of media coverage and so forth. But yeah, Ron Paul's a good guy for sure.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of videos from, I think it was his first run for libertarian president back in the 80s.
Okay.
And there's some like totally awesome interviews, and some of the talk shows back then were nuts, but
I saw the talk show that I'm thinking of then where I think they were asking some hardball questions about decriminalizing drugs or something, and then the little hostile, and he just kind of was right back at it, and it was that was kind of impressive. It kind of seems out of character for Ron, because he always strikes you as that just kind of calm, sensible demeanor, not real shaky devotee kind of guy. But on that one, he was certainly kind of revved up. It was, yeah, he's. I love Ron in a lot of ways because he would always just kind of speak the truth honestly, and it didn't always come out as cleanly as it ought to, but or didn't convince the people that were there, but he kept speaking the truth anyway, and I think that's why so many people in the Libertarian Party particularly love him. He's great.
So big cities, at least in America, have a tendency to have left-leaning majority voters. but more rural areas have a tendency to have right-leaning majority voters. Do you have a logical explanation for this?
I've noticed that trend too, and it is kind of interesting to me. But I think it boils down to me to the rural side of things. I think that people who are closer to the farmlands of America, they've got kind of a different understanding, honestly, a more real understanding of what it takes to produce things. On the farm, it takes a lot of work. It takes the right investment of capital. You have to put things together in just the right way to keep prosperity happening. You misallocate your resources. You don't put the work in. You struggle as a family. And I think rural people understand that. I think they're closer to that. Not that urban people can't, but I think they're a couple more levels removed from that understanding. And they feel like, well, what if we just tweak this policy or such to, distribute that a little bit more? I think rural voters recognize that doesn't work very well, or it's more likely to cause havoc than. I think that explains a lot of some of those tendencies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because like the further out you are from a city, the less dependent you are on public facilities, public transportation. You're naturally less dependent upon the government, and so I could see that sculpting an ideology of small government, basically.
Yeah, I like what Ronald Reagan said, that I think it was Reagan that said government governs best, which governs least. The less government's involved, usually the better. So.
Yeah. So why does identity politics seem to be a left-wing issue, and why are they important? Are they important at all?
I'm sure they are important. A lot of people, especially in the media, it seems like that's dominating the conversations, and not that it's not important, not that it's not something to be discussed. I feel like it's the wrong issue to put this much emphasis on. Right now we got people, we got wars happening overseas where people are, civilians are getting bombed and killed every day and terrorized by, our own military. We've got, thousands of people in prison for victimless crimes. We got people being stolen from every day through their paychecks. And you want to talk about identity politics? You want to complain because some people aren't nice enough to other people? I think it's tone deaf. I think really it's just not the key issue of our time that the media makes it out to be.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of it. I like to almost think of myself as like a radical humanitarian, because it's like, I think you need to be focusing on, like hunger and homelessness and the stuff that genuinely life-giving rights people do not have right now, like clean water.
Sure.
I think we should be focusing on everybody having clean water before we're talking about, equality rights, which are important.
Right.
But I think a lot of people think that we're more advanced of a society than we are. I think we give ourselves more credit because there's so many wars happening, which are just horrendous and just, terrible things. There's slavery is still like rampant among the states. People don't talk about that. They talk about, whether or not you're allowed to buy a wedding cake, which is, it's important.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know where to go with that, because there's 3 or 4 different things on there that kind of prompted another thought, and I can't think of what they were. But yeah, I mean, as far as the equality, I feel like all of our most of these groups that are crying for more rights, I think we already have equality under the law in general for a lot of things. Sure, there's some things that maybe need to be tweaked, but yeah, I think you're completely right that we've got a lot of bigger issues going on, and talking about slavery all over. I mean, if it just makes me think about taxes. I mean, when you've got when you're having to work for someone and give them all of your income, obviously that's completely slavery. That was kind of the definition of the problem there. That someone else is taking all of your your productive time and capacity and ability and keeping all the profits. Well, what if they're only taking a portion of that? Is that also still slavery? I think it's still a percentage of slavery, and I think our, like our income tax system, for example, is a vestige of kind of a sort of slavery. If we can't even work without somebody else taking from us, then they're stealing a portion of our lives or our productive capacity, and we shouldn't stand for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't maybe don't sit down and do the math, but it's like if you're earning like $50,000 a year, which is a decent living income, you're only seeing 39,000.
Right. Yeah. Most people work 2 or 3 months of their lives of each year just to pay taxes before they can really clear anything for themselves.
Yeah.
That way.
Yep. You're working until March for nothing, and then the rest of the year is you.
Yeah.
Gun rights are a popular topic with libertarians. In an age of mostly domestic peace that we as Americans live in, why is it so important that I be allowed to have a firearm?
I kind of think that's the wrong question, to be allowed to have a firearm. I think that that's not really it. I mean, I think if we're having a conversation about preventing people from having the opportunity to defend themselves, then that should raise some suspicions about what's actually being planned here. You wouldn't. You don't need to disarm populace to govern. Bottom line, I believe that that people should have whatever they choose to have for themselves. I think a well-armed society is a polite society, and while we're debating in Congress things like, well, should we ban bump stocks or should we allow bump stocks? I think we need to get rid of all of these rules that prevent the restriction of any tool that can be used for self-defense.
And I think a good rule of thumb is if the government can have it, I should be allowed to have it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's like if you want to eliminate guns, it's like from like a moral standpoint, I can understand that. But also I feel like we're too far. I feel like the only way to fix any kind of gun issue would be to kill Sam Colt, which obviously is not attainable. But yeah, it's like if the government can have more powerful weapons than the citizens, that's an unfair balance of power, and you got to look at why that's happening and why they would want more power over the citizens.
Yeah, and in another way, you can look at it. Of course, the point of government, the reason people coalesce and make governments, is to provide kind of a mutual self-defense, right? So if we're able to be well-armed and able to defend ourselves anyway, then we can move towards not needing a government at all. So I believe it's a necessary prerequisite step that the citizens be armed.
Yeah. Something often discussed with conservatives and sometimes libertarians is the relationship with religion and state. Do you feel that religion should affect our laws or policies?
Short answer, no. I think that the fact that how do I put this? I think that if you have a society based on voluntary interaction, then you won't end up with religious policies that are steered because of some religious reason. I think that individuals should be free to make the decisions that work for them, as long as you're not hurting people, not taking their stuff. And I think that well, short answer is, state and religion should be generally separate, but I don't think there's any, under the current system, I don't think there's any way to truly separate them completely. I think there's short of just scaling back all the laws in the first place and let people live as they choose to live. And boy, there's a lot we could go into as far as that goes, because there's obviously a lot of there's certain secular people look at the policies that are being created and thinking, well, that's just a religious choice, particularly when it comes to things like abortion and whatnot. There's the old adage that you can't legislate morality, but you kind of still can. All in all, I don't think government should be making any policies that would actually infringe on religious things anyway, and I don't think they should, all in all, state and religion should stay separated, and actual practical reality doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, it can be a tough subject to tackle, because it's like you don't want to seem like the villain when you say that, well, religion shouldn't be involved in politics, and religion bad. It's like that's not the point. People should have the freedom to believe whatever they want to believe, and that's awesome. But they shouldn't have the right to legally stop people from, or like enforce their morals on somebody else.
Correct. Yeah. And I suppose I've heard the argument made pretty frequently, and I agree with it, that a lot that the state itself is a sort of a religion. That when you look at key factors about what a religion requires, usually there's kind of a mutual code of ethics. There's your sacred symbols. There's your sacred texts. There's your actions that you take to as a part of the worship of and such. And when you look at, well, what is government? Well, you've got your sacred texts like the Constitution. You've got your sacred symbols like the flag. You've got your sacred songs and worship. You've got your activities that you do, like when they play the song, you're supposed to stand up and put your hand over your heart, that sort of thing. It's hard to make the case that devotion to government isn't a sort of religion in itself. And when you look at it through that lens and just kind of let that stew with the other things that you see in your life about how government just acts in general, it's hard not to see that. I mean, I can't read Daniel 3, the story of Nebuchadnezzar playing the song and requiring everyone to turn to the idol or such, without thinking about what we do at football games every time they play the anthem and everybody stands up and looks at the flag. I'm like, when I looked at those Bible stories as a kid, I was like, how did that populace ever just get so delusional to think that was a normal thing to do? And then I'm seeing it in our culture today the same way. It's kind of frightening, really.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, for sure. Jimmy Carter, our 39th president, he said, war may sometimes be a necessary evil, but no matter how necessary, it is always an evil, never a good. We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children. How do you feel about this quote?
I think he's onto something. I think that most wars are not just not a necessary evil. I think most wars are both evil and most of the time not necessary. And certainly the ones we're involved in now, or at least the military actions that aren't actually wars, I don't think they're necessary, but they're certainly evil.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many, I feel like there's a lot of people that just accept that we should be in Iraq or whatever and don't even really question it, because they're just like, oh no, well, they know best. They know what's in, because they always tout it in the name of the safety of the American citizens and the safety of the American future, when that's most often not the case.
Right. They're supposed to be fighting for our freedoms. I'm wondering, how did our freedoms get over there?
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Well, what it actually is, it affects their stock prices. So,
yeah, there's an argument made for that for sure. So,
which the politicians' stock prices directly affect my freedom, for sure.
Probably.
Yeah. Do you think the average American citizen cares too much or not enough about politics and the state around them?
Your timing of that question is perfect, because I was just kind of thinking about how when you look at all the things that we want to change in our society, that when you dig deep into politics, it has a tendency to just kind of make you depressed. Mm-hmm. There's just so much wrong. There's so much to fix. It seems like an insurmountable task. So I found this certainly with myself, that the more I dig into just actually the meat of making political actions happen, the more miserable I am. So to answer your question, should more people be involved in politics or not? I'm on the fence, because I think if more people were, I think we'd be maybe we might make some more policy changes, but I think generally more of us would be miserable, and that's no fun. I'd rather the rest of our world just be able to ignore politics and just move on with their lives and go on. So kind of both.
Yeah, a little bit off the path, but do you believe in democracy as a principle, or do you think that it doesn't work?
Well, that's a good question. 51% of the people can be wrong, and 51% of the people can choose representatives who can be wrong. By and large, I mean, democracy is better than a lot of other systems for sure, but I do not think it's a good way to secure liberty.
Mm-hmm. There was I was watching a video on this in like the early 1900s. There was an anarchist, a coming together of anarchists from all different nations, and they were having debates on like which system works better and what and any kind of like an anarchist society functioning actually like look like. And a big part of that debate, and I'll put a link to the video, but a big part of that debate was whether when a society votes on something, if majority rule should indicate a law or it has to be unanimous, which I found really, really interesting. That if like laws could only be passed by unanimous vote.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea of a government at all is to protect the rights of the individuals and the minorities, and I don't understand how you do that by having majority rule. A majority rule won't protect minorities. That's kind of the opposite of how that's supposed to work. So I'm not familiar with the conversation or the debate you're speaking of there, but yeah. I do know there's a fellow, Hans Hermann Hoppe, who wrote a book called Democracy, the God That Failed, which is incredibly dense material, but man, he's got a lot of truth in there. And he pointed out that one of the problems that democracy has, at least compared to say like a monarchy, is that the people who are in power for the short term, which incentivizes them to squeeze the most out of it in a short amount of time and ignore the long-term health of the system. Whereas in like a monarchy and so forth, they're very invested in the entire country being what am I trying to say? Sustainable and useful and profitable and growing over a long term. So you make wiser long-term decisions as a part of that. And he convinced me. It was pretty solid argument, some interesting points that even a benevolent monarchy is a better securer of prosperity over the long haul than even a democracy. Yeah, it's an interesting reading if you get a chance to check it out. I think you can get it for free through the Mises Institute. I think they have that document. Well, actually, I'm not sure what the book is. I think I found an audiobook somewhere. And man, it took some time to get through that because there's a lot of material. But yeah, that was really just one of his chapters, but it was a very interesting point.
Yeah, no, that is very interesting. It makes me wonder if like the 4-year term for American presidents is the most efficient thing, because I don't know. I always think of it as the two-party system is effective at being ineffective, because you'll have like 8 years of a Republican, and then you'll have 8 years of a Democrat, and the Democrat will spend 8 years reversing what the previous president did, and they just kind of go back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you have a Democratic president, you have a Republican Congress and vice versa. So you'll have 8 years of a Republican Congress, 8 years of a Democratic Congress, and those tend to not quite match up with each other either. Yeah, It's just not a useful system. I mean, the opposite of pro is con. So what's the opposite of Congress? Well, that's progress, of course. So it's just it's a system that, on the one hand is it had a pretty good design at first. When they set up the Constitution and this balance of powers, they came up with a lot of good stuff that has worked out okay over some amount of time. But as far as the long haul, it's still not as good as individuals leading their own lives and having governments more at a local scale than a national one. Yeah,
I see government kind of as it's just an avalanche. Eventually, it is going to all build up and terrorize.
Collapse under its own weight. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think that being anti-government, I think that the government system set up in the U.S. was really well designed to create as much gridlock and preventing the avalanche. But I recently read through the Declaration of Independence in detail, and I was looking at the things that they were complaining about the powers from England, and I was like, this sounds familiar. I was like, if we applied the Declaration of Independence to today's government, I think that it might apply just as well as it did back then.
Yeah. A lot of the grievances that we had with the King of England at that time, we put up with a lot more than those problems now. And we're not exactly declaring independence these days, unfortunately. But I mean, of course, the guiding principle, as I mentioned at the beginning, was the non-aggression principle. I don't believe that it's right to use the initiation of force to achieve interpersonal goals, societal goals, political goals. It's just generally not proper. And that's why we oppose government, because when we look around at society, like who's hurting people, who's taking their stuff, you don't see a lot of that among just the average citizens. Maybe, some people are, stealing from others, and some people are, assaulting others. There's some of that going on, but not nearly at the scale that's happening with the government. And so the reason we're anti-government is because government is the primary violator of the non-aggression principle. They're hurting people every day with not just with their wars, but incarcerating people for owning plants, and they're taking people's stuff, through our paychecks, through our property taxes, through insisting on sales taxes. I mean, they're the primary violator of that, and that's why we're anti-government. So back to the local side of things, a government that is local is easier to control. I mean, you're more likely to be able to talk with your local mayor than you are to talk with your guy that's in Washington, or be able to keep them in control. I mean, I guess there's phones now, but still, it's easier to control a local government than it is to control a national government. So I think that the closer we can get governments to the local level, and ultimately down to the individual level where they each govern themselves, the better off we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's the end of my questions.
Okay.
Chris, thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate it. Do you have any charities or organizations you'd like to shout out?
Sure. The Mises Institute is a great one. I believe it's Mises.org. A lot of great reading material that they provide for free to people. Also, the 10th Amendment Center is great. They're an organization that 10th Amendment is about nullifying unconstitutional things that are coming down from the federal government, and they've done a lot of great work. Definitely check them out. And those are the main ones for now.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I have links below in the description to private charities that help out your fellow human beings. Thank you all for listening.
All right.